Some of you may know me, some of you may not. My name is Darryl. My story has not always been a good one. Nowadays, I find myself in more successful circles, such as being a business owner, father, and a comedian who's been at it for 9 years. But to get there was a journey in itself, tough. I had to overcome obstacles. I had to fight. I had to deal with the issues of identity and find out who I am. Black stories do matter because a lot of times they go unheard and unnoticed. A lot of you guys wouldn't see the struggle I went through to get to where I've got to today. Tonight, I'm going to be curating for Odyssey Storytellers, Black Stories Matter. And tonight, we've gathered up a group of wonderful, terrific people that have been well-traveled to share with you their amazing stories. Our first storyteller is well-traveled, speaks multiple languages, served in our armed forces, and is a sucker for comic books. He actually told me a story about how he used to customize his toys and color them so they can match his own skin color. Ladies and gentlemen, show some love for Bryan Castle.
Thank you for this opportunity. You know, I always find it odd that I've been considered a cultural ambassador here in Tucson for a lot of things where all my life I was basically considered the odd man out. And my story begins with my mother and father. My mother was from the Deep South. She was basically raised on a plantation that her grandparents were slaves on. And my father was from South Dallas. He joined the Marine Corps, and my mother joined Job Corps, where she got her nursing degree. They did just like everyone else did. They migrated from the Great Migration from the South to the West Coast. They moved to LA in the 1970s, and that was the beginning of a lot of crime, a lot of the redlining, things of that nature, and they just didn't want that for their kids. So my father was a Marine, and they decided they wanted to take us out of there. The first place they moved us to was Arizona. And I know a lot of people think that Arizona is not a place where there's so much racism touch, but I have to tell you, Arizona is probably the most low-key racist place I've ever lived. I love this city, I love this state, but there's a lot of things that could be done better. So to move on with the story is basically I never really felt comfortable in the States because we moved overseas a lot. We lived in Guam, we lived in Japan, we lived all over, and it was beautiful. I loved it, and you know I got to experience a lot of different people. I got to learn a lot of different languages, and I got to be me. And it was a beautiful time. And every time we came back to the States, I hated it. I hated it because that's when I really knew that I was different than everybody else. Because on base, everyone was different. Everyone was a little of this, a little of that, from here, from there. So we all had to just get along. And the one thing we had in common was that we were Americans. So that made it a little different. That made it a little easier for everybody. But when we came back to the States, the American part was gone. You were black. You were Latino. You were this, you were that. So the first place we moved when we came to the States was Arizona, Nogales. And Nogales is a border town. And for some, I know people here on this podcast, they understand what Nogales is, but other people wouldn't understand that it's a town close to the frontera. And that's basically a town that's divided by an imaginary line, which isolates the people, which are really one community. So for me, because I lived there for so long, I learned Spanish. All my friends were Latino. And for the most part, every time we were in the States, we lived there. So I spoke Spanish, and I still speak Spanish. And I had a bit of a kinship with the Latino people of my town. So when we moved overseas one more time. And that last time we moved overseas was when my sister was the age of college. And at that time, we were in Guam. And Guam's college wasn't accredited. So my parents decided to move back to the States, and they decided to move back to Tucson at this time. So that was a culture shock, moving to Tucson for me, because I was used to living in the States where primarily Latinos and nobody else. So when I first went to high school there, we went to Cholla, and people know what Cholla is. Cholla is a very divided high school by race and color and things of that nature. So for me, I was kind of odd man out. You know, I was basically, as they would say, a black kid, you know. So I spoke Spanish, I hung out with the Latino kids and everything, and literally one day a black kid came up to me and was like, "What are you doing?" And I was completely confused. I had no idea what he was talking about. Besides dealing with my family and going to like most black families do from the South, where you spend the summers with your family in New York, Alabama, things like that, you treat kids, I didn't have a lot of interactions with other black people. So I went to where I was comfortable with Latinos. And so this kid was like, "What's wrong with you, man?" I said, "What are you doing?" And I was completely confused. He's like, "Why are you hanging out with these Mexicans?" And that was the first time I really realized. I was like, "Oh, okay, it's different." So from there, that's where I really started to mingle in with black people and understand black people and be around black people all the time, and that's where a lot of changes came into me. That's when I started reading about, Reconstruction, blacks in America, Frederick Douglass, things of that nature, and Western, and that's when I really started to challenge my parents, like most people do at 14, 15, 16. And because my mom was like everyone else, is from the deep South and very religious, Western religion, it came into play and it came into a big head in my house. I was like, this isn't what we were made for. Western religion and these things, and why is Santeria bad? Why is Candomblé bad? Why is Hoodoo bad? Why is Yoruba bad? Oh, because I said, no, that's propaganda, and these are things that changed my life. So, but on the same token, as a son of a southern black man, you're always raised to be better. So I went into the military. I was in the Marine Corps after that. I became a law enforcement officer, which most people can't believe nowadays. But yeah, I was immigration, and I did a lot of things in law enforcement. And after a while, I just got tired of it. I didn't want to do it anymore. I said there has to be something else for me. So I quit. And for 3 years, I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing. I took my pension and I walked around 4th Avenue and skated. I had some little adventure with some friends. I opened some record stores and things of that. And at this time, somebody came into my life. And something came into my life that changed my outward appearance, my outward perception of the world, basically. And it was a gentleman by the name of Contramestre Dandy Issue. He was a capoeira teacher. And this is the funny part of my story, which I always tell my friends. I was like, this guy was like a Dave Chappelle sketch. He had like an orange aura about him when he walked in a room. And he would see me every day at this bar. And he would come in there, and he had dreadlocks down to the floor. He had a dreaded beard. And he would walk in there, and he'd pass out these flyers to everybody. Hey, come to my class, come to my class. I was like, this bum. I was like, this dude needs to leave me alone. And he'd drink a Guinness, slam the Guinness down on the bar, pass out the flyers, and walk out. He'd be like, hey, black man, come to my class. I'm like, I do, whatever. So this was literally, I would say probably 3 or 4 months of him doing this. Every day. And then finally one day I said, you know what, man? I'll come to your class if you just leave me alone. So I walked with him down the street on 4th Avenue to his school. And it just so happened to be a day of what's called a batizado. It's a day of the big ceremony when you get your belt in this martial arts. And he took me in the back room, and there are all these people sitting in the back room. I mean, looking like the lambs led to the slaughter. I mean, they were sitting on the floor, bug-eyed, doe-eyed, scared out their minds. And there's this big, husky Brazilian dude back there telling them the story about some adventure he had in Brazil. And they are not listening. They're freaked out. And he walks out. And then the black guy, orange aura guy, okay, he walks in and he says, look, everybody, this is of your heritage. This is of your people. We are one tribe, no matter what color, what race you are. This is our Quilombo, our community coming together. And you're going to be all right. And after that, he had me hooked. I didn't miss a class for the first 4 years. And back then, we had class at 7 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 8 o'clock. I didn't miss a class for about at least 5 years. Not one. And with that, I joined and started to explore other things. And I went to Brazil, and I went to other countries, and I got opportunities to travel. And I saw blacks in the African diaspora that were basically, we were kinfolk with the deception of being dropped off on another island. That boat just didn't go that far. And walking around Bahia, walking around different parts of Brazil, where I could see myself and other people, and no fear of the differences, which I never really experienced it, only when I was in the United States, but everywhere else I didn't. But having that just kind of like filled a little empty spot, and I was like, I'm going to make sure I can take a piece of this back home. And my goal was always to make sure that capoeira or some form of this type of empowerment of our roots is shown to Black Americans. Because again, we're not a monolithic group, and what I say doesn't go for everybody. But I always felt that because the way we were taken and moved away, that we feel like something's missing and we don't have it. And we have to find it in some way in church, in groups, and things of that. And this is one thing I found that was purely us. So I've dedicated myself to showing it and making sure that we have something that we're proud of, and that's something that is shown to other people to show that you can't wear a crown if your head is down. So that's my story. And with that being said, I have a Casa de Cultura out here in town, a place called Movement Culture, and I avidly push that people of those races are the ones who teach those arts. Hawaiians teach my hula, Filipinos teach my eskrima, things like that, because things get so whitewashed and the true, authentic piece of it gets taken away. And I understand that we're America and we're all this giant melting pot, but we can't enjoy the flavor if we don't know which each ingredient really is.
Our next storyteller, not only is she an Army veteran, a comedian, awesome mother, she's also a good friend of mine, just a great joy to be around. And anytime she's in the room, she's going to light it up with her energy. Everybody show some love for my girl, Stephanie Lyonga.
So I grew up in Cameroon, which is in West Africa, which is right next to Nigeria, if you don't know where it is on a map. But I grew up in a blended family. My dad married my stepmom, who's white. And, my dad and my stepmom had their own kids. And then my stepmom took me in when I was 1, along with my brother, who was 4 at the time. So I grew up in a blended family. And this happened when I was 1. So growing up in a blended family, really in Africa at that, was not different for me. I felt loved at all times. I didn't see anything different. I didn't feel weird that my brother and I were the only dark people in the family. My brother, my dad, and I were the only dark ones in the family. We didn't feel like that, My mom has always been very, very protective. Like, I remember when we were young, I think I was about 3 or 4, and we went to the market, and the market is not your typical market here. Merchants bring their stuff, whatever they're selling, be it fresh vegetables that they just literally picked off the farm, or shoes that they've handmade themselves, and they all line up on the street. Now, Tuesdays and Thursdays are market days, so people driving on the street know that those days it's going to be hard to get around, because they're literally merchants on both sides of the street selling stuff. It's market day, So I remember my mom took us to market day, and we're looking at tomatoes on the side of the street, and everybody knows my mom. Everybody knows my mom and my dad. My dad is like a local doctor. Everybody knows him. He's like the doctor that was the main doctor for the high schools, elementary schools, most factories. He's like the main doctor for them. So everyone knows who my dad is, and everybody knows who my mom is. So they saw this lady sees my mom, and she's like, "Hey, Mrs. Lyonga, how you doing? I see you got the kids." And she sees me, and she's like, "Who's this other little kid that you got with you?" And I remember my mom getting so offended that this lady had referred to her as like referred to me as this other kid. And she snapped on her, like, "That's my daughter. Like, don't question her. Don't even look at her." Like, I remember her getting angry, and I was like, and that stuck with me. And I never could understand why, she was so upset at people asking her who I was. Like, it's almost like she expected them to just know that I was her kid and don't ask any questions, So that dawned on me for a long time when I was a kid. And then when I was about 10, 11, getting older, I kind of realized, okay, mom's not the same color as me. And I know that, I'm smart. So I know that, she didn't give birth to me. So I asked her, like, "Are you my mom? Are you my real mom?" And she explained to me, like, "No, I'm not, but I am your mom." Just because I didn't give birth to you doesn't mean I'm not. I will love you forever. You will always be my daughter, and it is what it is. So I put it on the shelf. I was like, okay, I'm not worried about it because mom's always going to be mom, you know? So I never questioned that. And I always felt love from her. Like, I'm allergic to eggs. I don't eat eggs. So I never really had a birthday cake. I never enjoyed a birthday cake. So my mom, for as long as I could remember, would make me a popcorn cake, which would be caramel popcorn, Skittles, M&Ms, like all kinds of candy infused, and she'd make it into tiers. Like it'd be like a 4 or 5 tier cake, and it'd be just literally popcorn, sugar, and every candy that a child could dream of, you know? And I remember there was times when kids coming to my birthday would be like, nah, we don't even want the real cake. We want that popcorn cake. You know what I mean? So I always remember the popcorn cake was always my thing. Like I always had a popcorn cake. So she always showed me that extra love that it never felt different. It never felt like she was not my mom, or it never felt different because she was white that she wasn't mine, you know? But fast forward, you know, I'm in boarding school. My sisters and I, that was a thing in Africa too. So when your kids get of age, I would say about 11, 12, they go to boarding school. Now, boarding school is not bad because it actually teaches kids discipline, respect, a lot of things. So it was an automatic, you go to boarding school. So at this point, it's my 2 older sisters and I in boarding school. And one day I remember the principal comes and picks me up, or comes to my classroom and says, I need to talk to you in my office. I'm like, okay. I'm like, all right. The principal is really good friends with my dad. So I'm like, okay, if I was in trouble, I would have gotten a real good pep talk on the way to this office. Now, the fact that I didn't get this pep talk is making my wheels spin. So I'm like, okay, what has happened? What has happened? So we get to his office and he says, you know, your dad is going to come pick you up. And I'm like, okay, pick me up and take me home, from school. And I'm like, okay, why is he not taking my sisters? And he's like, well, you know, it's just something, you know, your dad just wants you to go home. So I'm like, okay. Now, we don't like boarding school. I don't give a damn what kind of kid you run across. No kid likes boarding school, okay? When someone comes and says you are going home, we don't ask no questions. We pack our bags. Where are we going? Shoot, take me to my car where I'm going. I'm not asking no questions. I don't want you to change your mind about me going home. So I'm in the back of my mind, I'm like, my sisters are not coming, but I really want to go home. So I'm just going to go home and ask questions later. So we go home. My dad picks me up. We go home. I ask my dad, why am I going home? And he's just like, you know, I got something for you at the house, and I can't let you know what it is till you get home. We get home. There's another car there. Go inside. There's a black lady sitting in the house. Now, everybody in Africa is black, so that's not confusing to me. You know what I'm saying? I see people every day. My dad's a doctor. It could be a patient. He's got an office in the house. So, you know, I'm not thinking anything about it. I'm walking inside the house. This lady's standing up. She's walking towards me. At the same moment, my dad is like, okay, this is your mother. I'm like, huh? You know, before I can even question what's happening, this lady gives me a hug. And I have literally 5 minutes to process literally what's happening. And apparently this is my biological mom who's here. And my dad explains to me in so many words, she's here to take you and go live with her in the US. Now, the greatest misconception that we have in Africa is everyone thinks that when you leave Africa and come to the US, it is the best thing in the world. It's the land of gold, milk, and honey. Everyone is rich. When you go there, you suddenly have made it in life. So that's the perception I have in my mind. I'm like, okay, as bad as it is that I don't want to leave home and my comfort zone, everyone says America is the best thing. So, okay, this should be good, right? Good. Okay. So I'm like, all right, I'm not too bent out of shape about it, but I'm upset. I don't really want to leave, but this is supposed to be a good experience. All right. Day before we leave, I'm at the beach. It's Christmas. I'm at the beach and having the time of my life. The next day, I'm going to the US of A. This is great. I'm telling all my friends. My dad throws me a little party. We're good. Next day comes, I say goodbye to my mom, which was the worst day of my life. Saying goodbye to my mom. And I remember getting on that plane and asking myself, what am I doing? Is this the right thing? You know, should I? And in Africa, you know, kids don't really have a choice. It's like it's what your parent says, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? So I didn't have a choice. But I knew in my heart that I didn't want to do this. So fast forward, we get to Chicago. That's where we're at. That's where my mom lives. I get out we're going to the car. We've gotten out the plane, got our bags. And I'm like, wait a minute. There's snow everywhere. Apparently there was a blizzard the day before. No one gave me the memo. I have this thin jeans jacket. I'm like, who in the right mind would want to live here? I'm looking around for Black people, can't find not one in sight. I'm like, oh Lord, this cannot be it. Who wants to live here? I'm clutching every piece of clothing I got to keep warm. I'm just in my mind like this. Okay, so far the weather is a no for me. Okay, but okay, let me give it a shot. My mom enrolls me in school. I go to school, first day of school, get my schedule. There's a kid, taking me around, and they're explaining to me what is what. And, first encounter with the Black kids, because these are the first, Black people that I'm actually seeing is in school. It's not a lot of them. It's a handful, but all right, they look like me. No reception. I explained that I'm from Africa. First thing they ask, y'all live on trees? That's like mind blowing to me, because I'm like, okay, we have cars. We have a president. We have everything that you have here. Girl, I was at the beach a few days ago. You know what I mean? No, we don't live on trees, but this was the perception of all of them, not just one. Some were like, are lions and bears walking on the street? And it's like, do y'all live in huts? Do y'all even have houses? Do y'all have clothes? And I'm thinking to myself, is this the perception they have of us? Because we think that everything here is great. We don't think that you guys are this stupid, So that's what's going in my mind. So, and they were not nice. I didn't have any Black friends in high school. Not any. They were mean. They said mean things to me. Like, that's the first time I heard African booty scratcher. I still don't know what that is. I'm 37. I still don't know what that is. So it was not the reception that I thought. And now at this time, I'm ready to go home. I'm ready to go back home to what I know as my comfort zone, And fast forward, I'm like, okay, there's got to be better than this. So I joined the military. And my first, literally, 9/11 happened when I was in basic training. So we couldn't even help that. So I got deployed literally as soon as I got to my duty station, which was Fort Hood, Texas. And when I got to Fort Hood, everyone was getting deployed. So I got orders to get deployed. First deployment, of course, is Iraq. When I got to Iraq, it's sad to say this, but that was the first little bit of comfort, of the closest thing I got to home. It felt like home. And not just it looking a little bit like home, because of course Africa is a third world country, but there's good parts and there's bad parts. And I saw that. I saw the good parts and I saw the bad parts. And I was like, this is what I remember. You know what I mean? Now, our perception of America is everything's freaking great. But all I saw was horrible. I saw the ghetto. I saw homeless people on the street. And it was not what I was used to, And I felt so at home in Iraq. Now, take away, being a war and them shooting at us, but it felt so much more like home to me, And I remember telling my mom that I want to come home. Like, this is not what I thought it was. I want to just come home. And it's sad that, Iraq is the closest thing I have to home. And she always would tell me, just, you are stronger than that. Just hold on. It's okay. Just do what you got to do. Do your thing and then come visit us. You can always come home whenever you want to, And I went back home 3 years ago, sadly, when my dad passed away. And it was such a sense of peacefulness that I've never experienced before. And, and it's sad that, a lot of people from third world countries, Mexico, Africa, India, they come here thinking that they can find a better place, a better life. And sometimes we come here and we face things like racism. And it's ridiculous. Not only racism, but America has the highest amount of poverty. And in places like Africa, you are not in poverty at all. Like, you will not see a homeless person at all. You will see, if someone's on the street, they're physically handicapped or they're mentally insane. But a physical able body will not be homeless, And I remember always going back to my mom, my stepmom, and telling her, like, I don't like it here. I feel so at home with you back there. And the irony of my whole story is, like, I've learned unconditional love from a white lady who's my mom, and her name is Karen. And that's like the best thing that I can say happened to my life is Karen. So that's my story.
Our next storyteller, not only is she an amazing mother, she's an incredible athlete who started off in capoeira and eventually got into jiu-jitsu, which took her all the way around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, show some love for Miss Davia Moore.
I'm a Tucson native. I actually was born in California, but then my mom got a job opportunity and she packed up her whole family and came to Tucson, and I was a really young kid. I am number 6 of 7 children. I have 5 brothers and 1 sister. One of my brothers had cerebral palsy. He's my baby brother. He actually passed away. But before he passed away, you know, my mom had to work, and my brothers and siblings, they were all busy. Most of them had already been moved out of the house. So I had a lot of responsibility when I was a young kid, because as you know, when you have a sibling or a son or a daughter that has any kind of physical illness, like my brother had cerebral palsy, that pretty much paralyzes the entire body. So there's wheelchairs, there's feet braces, there's appointments and all different types of things added to your home life for his comfort. And that takes a lot of energy. So the entire family is really involved. Years went by, and like I said, he passed away. And in a sense, that gave me more freedom than I had before he had passed away. And I say that because I had a lot of responsibilities. And so a lot of my special things I really couldn't do because, you know, we had to focus on my brother and his comfort, that's just the way it was. So I got to experience more activities as a child. I got to do ballet, I got to do basketball, I got to do volleyball, and I got to participate in things otherwise that I couldn't because, you know, the time and the space wouldn't allow it. And so, you know, years go by and I grow up more and I discover this art called capoeira. Capoeira is an Afro-Brazilian martial art. It's incredible. It uses your body to its full potential. You use your head, your hands, your knees, your elbows. You flip. You practice singing. You learn instruments. There's kicks, and it's it's a martial art, and so there's incredible amounts of things that you can learn in that art. And so I found that art at the age of 15. And I would train like 2 times a day, first in the morning before school because I had a class at like 7 o'clock in the morning. And then I would train for 45 minutes or whatever. And then I would get ready in the locker room. Then I would go to school because my capoeira school was no more than like 6 blocks from my high school. And then I would go home and do, you know, the go home stuff, homework and all that. And then I would go and train capoeira at night. So time went by, and in about 2008, I'd still been training throughout high school and, you know, into my adulthood. By the time 2008 came around, I said, I want to take capoeira to the next level. And so I moved to the Bay Area to train with one of the grandmasters of capoeira, Mestre Cordion. I really enjoyed the Bay Area. That really opened up my eyes to so many things. I mean, when you do capoeira, you travel, you go different places because people have different events. And so you go and you perform at those events in a sense. You know, there's trainings and workshops and dance workshops and all these really beautiful things that you do. So you're always traveling all the time. So I decided to grow a little further in my capoeira, and I moved to the Bay Area. In moving to the Bay Area, I acquired many jobs through capoeira in teaching youth at, they're called them enrichment programs. And so we did all these enrichment programs from preschool, middle school, and high school. And I also taught at the main school as well as did traveling then. So when that life ran its course, I ended up moving back to Tucson in about 2012. That's when I got bit by the jiu-jitsu bug. It was incredible. Obviously, jujitsu is not jujitsu bug. It's just a phrase that jujitsu people say when they get really interested in jujitsu because they're like, oh, this is so cool. I have got to continue training this. So I fell in love with jujitsu. I trained here for a year. It was incredible. I saw my teammates compete in Vegas, and they're just incredible. I mean, jujitsu is a grappling art. Okay, it's a grappling art it's like wrestling and grappling, but it's not. It has roots in Japan and in Brazil, and it's performed in a uniform that's called the gi. That's super thick material that you use to control your component, but you guys are wrestling at the same time. So it's very complex, but you learn a lot, and it really gave my life tremendous depth because it's Jiu-Jitsu is an incredible art, and if anybody out there has trained they know that it takes a lot of focus, and it's extremely fun, but it also challenges you in lots of different ways. So when I continued training Jiu-Jitsu, I noticed that I was the only woman on the mat most of the time, and not only just the woman on the mat, but the only Black woman on the mat. And I think that kind of, that's just an example of where you live in the country, because you could go to a jiu-jitsu academy on the East Coast and there could be an all Black academy. You know what I mean? Like it just depends on where you live, what type of demographic is there, right? So I would notice that, but I would also notice that just my presence alone on the mat would give other women the permission to try the art as well. And I could see that, and people also told me that. And so that really gave me a lot of pride in knowing that just my presence being on the mat was permission for other women to try the art. They see and they say, oh man, maybe I can do that too. So after I was in Tucson, I had an opportunity to move to Hawaii. So I moved to Hawaii and I pursued my jiu-jitsu even further at an academy there for about 3 years. That was the academy where I learned how to teach children. I tried to start a little women's program as well there. I taught capoeira there as well. And I learned a tremendous amount about Hawaii and the permaculture of Hawaii and the culture of Hawaii, the people. It was incredible. And the jiu-jitsu there is fabulous. And that's a place that will forever have a deep space in my heart. So, that time ran its course and I came back to the Bay Area. I continued doing capoeira because that's my bread and butter. And I ended up meeting my husband and we fell in love and we wanted to start a family. So we packed our stuff up for the Bay Area and moved down to Tucson, and we made our daughter, and this is where we reside. So it's been incredible. You're always surrounded by many cultures. We speak 3 languages in our house. And we're always trying to go further. So that's my story.
Hi, everyone. For those of you that are not familiar with me, I am Ana, executive producer of Odyssey Storytelling. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm here to introduce the last couple of storytellers. First up is Michael Bo Phillips, who goes by Bo. Now, Bo has lived a lot of different places, but like many of us, ended up here in Tucson. He also pursues an acting career here in town. So please enjoy his story and then stick around for one more.
My experience as a Black male in this country, it hasn't been the best. It's been violent. It's been abusive. It's been just all around an entire Molotov cocktail to destroy someone, and I wouldn't ever even ask it on my worst enemy if I were presented the opportunity to do so. But for the sake of transparency and the fact that I have my own philosophy of life, which is there's a positive retrospect to everything. I did take a lot of what I reflect on now away from those experiences and extract the whole ensemble of how much it really did leave a positive impact on my life. Even though it would, at surface value and at surface just, overlooking it, it wouldn't seem like there's much positive impact from it, but There truly is. When I was younger, I was unfortunately one of the stereotypical Black males that had a certain upbringing. And, that upbringing was having a crackhead father in the household. And, it's even more ironic too, because the more that I talk about this, to other Black people, the more I find that that statistic really is accurate. It's up there. I can't say exactly what percentage of Black males in this country between what certain ages off the top of my head actually, go through or endure the exact same experience, but it's a high number, and it sucks because I know a lot of what it derives from too is just, it's the systematic environments that we were like purposefully placed in. And it's definitely something where, oh yeah, like there is a power in this country, and there is a supremacy in this country that really does want us to destroy ourselves. But, from what I've learned to just understand about really getting to know thyself is to how to respond to it and how to endure afterwards. From what I've learned, coming from what I did, is we can't control other people. We can't control helping them. We can't control what we can do to try to pick up the slack for their unhealthiness, or try to pick up the slack for what they need to do to help themselves more. There's just some things in life you can't pick up the slack for. And in regards to individuals trying to get better or trying to recover from certain things or trying to be better, that is one of those things we just can't pick up the slack for. The things that I experienced, it was, the physical violence. It was the beating of my mother in front of me, and then me and my younger brother also in the household getting beaten, and then just, coming home in the middle of the night, and, it's the paranoia of crack cocaine saying, oh, someone's going to come in the house and kill us, and da-da-da-da-da, and ripping up the floors saying our house is bugged, taking the phones apart, saying that the phones are tapped, and all these different things. It's just like, and then just, of course, just being in a rough neighborhood that didn't help at all any too, with gang violence and just different things we would hear. And it's just, and different things we had to kind of just look out for amongst each other when it came to just going outside the house. But, what I really want to focus and hone in on is just, it doesn't have to be the narrative of keeping yourself in those states where you feel like you still can't come back from all the different things that have happened to you. You can, and there's ways to do it, and where I've chosen to really just lead with a foot of understanding amongst individuals is the fact that trauma is very real, and it's very prominent within our lives, and where the trauma bleeds into in the school system, in the workplace, in our homes, in just out in public. It happens a lot. So the trauma that I endured, it's led me to, instead of respond from it in a very aggressive way, instead of being more of a, more of an angry person, more of a hateful person, more of a spiteful person. I've just chose to love people more. I've chose to try to be understanding and be very forgiving. There was once a quote by a man, and this guy is a very dear friend of mine. I was telling him one day that I'm very anxious man, and I'm very just very I feel very disrupted inside of myself, and I feel just very stressed out all the time. And he'd be like, "Ooh, really? So who haven't you forgiven?" And, all those different things that have happened to us, especially as Black males in the Black community, we have endured a lot. And history can't be rewritten. It can't be undone. It can only be accepted. And we can't deny that there's been many attempts to destroy us. It just didn't work.
Our last story of the night comes to you from Martha T. Wills and William O. Wills. Now, the Wills family is pretty unique. They've been in Tucson for many years. And of course, they actually have a pretty unique organization. They're actually in charge of what's called the Racial Reconciliation Community Outreach Network. Now, if you'd like to learn more about that particular ministry, their church, their ministry, and what they do with that, please stick around at the end of our show. We're going to have a special video specifically from them and another member of their ministry to explain exactly what their ministry is all about. In the meantime, please enjoy a couple of stories from them about their travels and their experiences.
1965, I believe, is when we were assigned to, what's the Air Force base name? Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls, Montana, where there was only 9 African-American residents in the city, okay? Now, the base is where we were living, but in Great Falls, there were only 9 African-American people, let's put it that way. And there was one Black church there. It's the AME church. But anyway, we just left England, where we've been there for 3 years, went to Great Falls, and was expecting to, be able to go to a beauty shop, get my hair done, because in England, we didn't have that other than our homes, where there may have been a beautician could help us to get our hair done. That was okay. But coming back to the States, I'm thinking, wow. And even we went to the BX to get products, I might say, to do our hair. They had none. And so that began another fight, a whole nother fight. So I began to reach out to different people, reach out to some of the people that were, senators and whoever in the state, in the city of Great Falls, to find out who could help me. Then through the Air Force, I put the IG, whatever that is, and chaplain on the base, and just anybody, women, wives, etc., because they were telling me they couldn't get it, couldn't have it in there. And even went so far as to reach out to Lady Bird Johnson, because President Johnson was the president of the United States at the time. And so doing all of that, people got so angry with us. I mean, they really was upset because some of the ladies backed out because they felt like my husband would not get promoted, and like mine didn't after that. But in the meantime, what happened though, I reached out to the college of Great Falls, that was Sister Providencia, and I would go on the base, go to the chaplain, and they would see me coming, they would turn it back. They didn't want to be bothered with me. So then I'd have people come to my house, some of the senators and so forth, and they would come to the gate, the base gate. They would ask them wherever they're going, and they tell them my house, and they would really turn them away because they did not want them to be involved with me. So I got in touch with the Air Force Times, was talking to them, and finally got a call from them that we can't let you do this any longer. It's just a lot of things. But in the meantime, we didn't have one church there. So we were all African-American people wanting to worship together. And there was a nice pastor there. He welcomed us. and there was no choir, so we formed a choir. My husband became the choir director. We had a good time, just all different type of religious people. We weren't concerned about what church you belonged to, who you were, who you served. You served the Lord, but we weren't concerned about that. So they got another pastor there. Of course, he put us out. But in the meantime, getting back to my story here about the bass and the BX. And so what I kept working with that, making people more angry with us than ever, and just being pushy, I'd say. And so working with my husband, and there was another young lady who wasn't afraid. In fact, she became a state senator. She was Airman's wife. But what happened, we stuck together. And finally, well, at this particular church, we became Presbyterian. We had been other faiths, but we just didn't care. We wanted to be with God's people. So this pastor's wife was a reporter for the, I think the what's the name of the paper? The Great Falls Tribune, okay? And so she put a big article in the paper. Mike, now I have that information, but in the meantime, that made things worse. And so my husband got called in, I think, by his commander, the base commander, right? The base commander called him in, said, "You stop your wife, else we're gonna put you off this base." And so, but in the meantime, they didn't put us off. I kept going, and finally got a call from, I'm trying to think of the name of the person from DC, who said, "Send us the information," because we trying to get out of there after a while. We didn't want to stay there because everything was hard. And so they send us all this paperwork, all this stuff you've been doing, put it together and send it. And later on, they called my husband and told me, you're getting an assignment. Where am I going? To a hot place. And I guess he thought.
The hottest place at that time was
Vietnam.
Was Korea. Korea. And I was thinking, I said, well, if I go there, I only going to stay about a year and then I'm out of there. But the hot place they sent me to was Davis Moore.
Yes.
In Tucson, Arizona. Right. Which I didn't even know it existed.
And so, but what happened, let me tell you, before we left there though, about a week or so before we got this assignment, I got a call from some friends of mine. They said, "Well, you're leaving now, but they changed the base, they remodeled it, they put an African-American beautician in there." So I didn't reap the benefits, but I worked hard to push for that. So they did put someone in there, but that all stemmed from not preparing for African-American people. See, in other words, they had the BX open, they should have had all the products in there for us, but they didn't have anything. And so it's made everybody upset. It's a long story behind that, but I want to share that with you because, and this cross was placed on our yard. And then after that, we go to the NCO club, and they would not sit with us. We go play bingo or something. We were just ostracized. That's all. I don't know. But anyway, a lot of things went on in that story. It's a long history behind that one.
One of the other things too, she tells you that there was one cross put on the yard, but there was also another one put inside our garage, hung up against the wall in our garage. And during that period of time, I was sent on a special mission to Thule, Greenland. So I was on special mission because of my training and expertise. And I was away for about 47 days while a lot of this happened. So it's an interesting story. I mean, as she said, I was called in by the base commander and told to stop my wife, shut her up, stop her from talking. And prior to that, I had been called in by another officer at the headquarters, and he was trying to find out what was my problem. And I was telling him, says, I don't have a problem. I say, I expect the same thing that you expect from me. You expect respect from me, I expect respect from you. And that was it. So it's interesting. I mean, we can get into more details, a lot more detail. So,
but we finally got the beauty shop ready. We finally put
a black operator.
Yeah, put products in the BX. That was a fight to get that. So anything I find out, I have to fight for this. But I'm a fighter. I know that.
And Lyonga was shot in 1936 with his hands in the air, nothing in his hand, did not have the information or the implements that the policeman claimed he had when he shot him. I was 4 years old at the time. I had one sister at that time who was 3. So other than I can remember certain things about that time, but other than that, I really don't remember. For a fact, I don't remember much about my father at all. Right. I remember all the things about when I was taken over into the place and beaten by the police. Because when my mother came back home, she had gone to the beauty parlor. And when she came back home and found me all bloody, they took me to the hospital emergency room. They checked me out and bandaged me all up. And I was banned from going into the park for about 8 or 9 months. All I could do was go down on the stoop of my house and sit. I could not go to the park. And a little later on, when I finally convinced her that I needed to go back in the park so I could run and play tennis and basketball, etc., she finally let me go back in. And I'll never forget, I'd been there, I guess, in the park for about 2 or 3 months, maybe a little more. And I was on the basketball court playing ball, and this young man walked into the court and said, "Bill, there's someone wants to see you at the gate." I said, "Who is it?" He says, "I don't know." I said, "Okay, well, forget about it." I kept on playing ball. He came back again and said, "Bill, you're going to have to go up there and see those people." I said, "Who are the people I have to see?" And he told me, he said, "There's policemen. They want to talk to you." I said, "You go back and you tell them I'm not coming up here to talk to them." So he came back a third time and said, "They told me to tell you that if you don't come out there and talk to them, they're coming in here and get you." Well, in my mind, the first thing I'm looking at and formulating, how do I get out of that park where they can't catch me? And I had already made my model. I knew exactly how I was going to get out of that park, but they wouldn't be able to catch me. But I walked up to the gate. I walked out the gate, and there was 2 officers sitting in a police car right out in front of the gate. So I walked maybe close enough where it would take you, your arm reach about 2 times to touch me. And I stopped there and I asked them, what do they want? And the ones closest to me in the car says, "We want to get you get in the car so we can talk to you." And I let them know in no uncertain terms that I wasn't getting in their car, what they could do with it, and took off running for the house. And in 100 yards then, if you weren't beside me and had your hands on me, you lost the race. I made it to the house hollering for my mother. For my mother at the time. And it was funny because when I hit my block, all the people were out there. Because when I was growing up on that block, if I did something 6 blocks away, I got punished all the way back to the house and got punished when I got in the house. So I didn't worry about that. If I got on my block, you weren't going to touch me. But upstairs I went, and my stepdad happened to be home at the time. And he says, "I'll tell you what, I'm going to take him over to the police station. We're going to find out what they want." So we went from my house, walked over to the police station, which was just a little over a block away. Went in there and he went up to the desk sergeant and says, told him what his name was, and said, "This is my son. What do you need?" And the desk sergeant told him, "We don't know what you're talking about. We don't need him for anything." And then my dad let him know that if any of your people mess with him again, I'm going to break your neck. Do you understand that? And we walked out and never had another problem with him. My wife was sitting there laughing. She said, "Bust, bust, bust, bust." My stepdad, I never called him dad, I called him Buster. And now if I was talking to you, I would say my stepdad. But he was Buster to me. And I was his son. So that gives you a little bit of history. But we have a lot more than that.
Hello again, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our show this evening, taking the time to watch all of these amazing stories and experiences from all of these folks who decided to join and participate in our show this evening. Now, I want to remind everyone that tonight's show is a special fundraiser show, specifically for the Tucson chapter of the NAACP. So if you're thinking about donating, want to donate, and maybe are not sure how to do that, please go to our website, odysseystorytelling.com, and there's a link right there for you to be able to click on to make a donation. Any donations made for this particular show will be donated over to the NAACP Tucson chapter. Also, I want to mention, now that we're at the end of our show, I've got 2 special clips for you if you'd like to stick around and watch them. The first is an interview that I did with Doris Snowden, who's the president of the NAACP here in Tucson. We had a really good discussion, and I hope you'll stick around to watch that. And then, of course, after that, we've got a video as well from the Wills family explaining about their ministry, what it entails, and more information about that as well. Thanks again for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed, and we hope that tonight will also spark interest in getting more involved in allyship toward the Black community, and doing everything that you can specifically to support that community. We should all obviously help each other out. That's what Odyssey is all about. And we're hoping that tonight's show will continue to encourage that kind of behavior from our beloved audience. We know you usually do that anyway, but we want to obviously extend that encouragement to you again. All right, love and miss you all. Wish I could see your faces in person, but here we are. So we hope you enjoyed. Have a good evening. Okay, so nice to see you again, Doris. This is Ana Gaskin again, or actually you may have noticed we changed my name. It's actually now Ana Montañez. Anyway, I'm the executive producer for Odyssey Storytelling, and I'm really glad to talk to you today. So I wanted to get to know you a little bit better today, and hopefully our audience get to know you too. So let's start with just a quick introduction. Would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Hello, my name is Doris Snowden. I'm the president of the local Tucson branch NAACP for the past 6 years. I'll be ending my term in December, so it'll be a total of 6 years.
Wow, that's a long time. Congratulations. Awesome. So we were talking a little while ago when we first got to talking about this whole, the show and just the possibility of doing this as a fundraiser for the NAACP. And I got really interested in your own personal story too. So as a matter of fact, I think the day we were talking was actually the day that we found out that John Lewis had passed, which has just been such a big impact, right? So you mentioned that day that you had a kind of a similar path or a similar story. So I was wondering what you meant by that. How did you get involved in activism?
Probably I would say my path started, I was born in Coleman, Texas, very small town. We may have two street lights. And then my mom went home there from Hilla Bend, Arizona, because back in those days, segregation was occurred. And so my mother, having difficulty with pregnancies, went back home to her mother. And then probably I was about, when she was able to drive, I would say approximately 2 months old, we moved back then to Hilla Bend, which my parents had moved there because of the railroad and the cotton that was there. Being from Texas, they knew they could get employment. So I was in Hilla Bend, and like I said, I don't do camping because for the first 12 years of my life, I had an outhouse, so I don't camp. I camped for the first 12 years. So at the age of 12, we moved to Tucson, and I attended Drachman elementary school where I graduated out of the 6th grade and then matriculated on to Tucson High. And at the time where I lived on Convent and 17th, that was a predominantly African-American Hispanic neighborhood. Now you see the neighborhood with renovation coming in with TCC. It's moved out, so there's lawyers and all other kind of places, and that was a very flourishing Black community in those days. They had things like service stations, a lot of businesses. It was bars naturally, and they had barbershops. Al Longmire started down there, so this is in the days, and Hispanic restaurants and Chinese grocery stores. So it was a really flourishing area for African Americans and other minorities. So that was my beginning. And going back to Hilla Ben, I think I started with knowing about activism from my mother, Bernice Payne, and my father was John Payne. She would feed the hobos that came through, and now they're called homeless people, but they must have marked our house because we always had a traffic of homeless people coming through our yard, and my mother would feed them on the back porch, our leftovers. Our home, I was poor, but I never went hungry. And I didn't know I was poor till I moved to Tucson, Arizona, because in Hilla Ben, we were all, Black, white, Native American. We were all like kind of in the same boat. And my first 2 years in Hilla Ben, I attended segregated schools, and they integrated when I was in the 2nd grade. And then we matriculated on to the white school.
Okay. Well, and I wonder, because you were present during that time when, at least in Hilla Ben, if they were moving away from segregation and integrating, and like you mentioned, you started going to that school. Was that a challenging time for you, or what? Kind of describe that for me. What was that like?
I don't think it was, well, the only challenge is that in our segregated school, it was a one-room schoolhouse where Mr. Taylor and Miss Arcella took kids in as long as they were potty trained. So people brought their sisters and brothers. And so the change for me was seeing Miss Arcella, who had a master's degree, had to go cook in the local kitchen to have a job, because that's what happened with integration. Our Black educators got displaced. Mr. Taylor, on the other hand, was put in a trailer outside of the school, and I really never knew what he did. But my second grade teacher was Mrs. Heidi. I'll always remember her because back then kids took naps. She'd always allow me some days to oversleep. She'd wake me up and drive me home in her Studebaker. So I have fond memories. And I remember Mrs. Heidi. Now, ask me any other teacher's name in Hilla Ben, I can't tell you, but I remember Mrs. Heidi.
Wow, that's interesting. So, and then when you arrived here, about what age were you at that time?
I was 12. We arrived Halloween night, so I got to trick or treat for the first time in the city and not the country. I was like the country mouse coming to the city. And so it was different. The neighborhood, like I said, where I moved was predominantly Hispanic and African American. So it was in a neighborhood the people that I was used to. And going to Drachman was really a good experience, nothing negative. And going on then to Safford, it was junior high then, now it's middle school, was, it was a good experience. I can say the only thing I would say is that I did not have another African American teacher until the 9th grade, Mr. Preston, Lamont Preston. So that's where the difference came in. You didn't see African American teachers, and he was my biology teacher, and that was such a joy to have finally an African American teacher at Tucson High School.
It makes a difference, right? Like I feel like when you see somebody reflecting what you look like in that type of a position. I don't know about you, but for me, I felt like it gave me some kind of hope,
It
moving
did.
forward in the future. Yeah.
I felt, he understood. He was an excellent teacher. He went on to be a principal. He's since passed, but I'll always have fond memories of Mr. Preston.
That's beautiful. That's great. And so when I wonder, back then, especially because I've heard some stories from people before, we've had storytellers, talk about what Tucson was like at that time. In fact, we had a story, I believe it was last year, of talking about what Tucson was like when it was segregated, and the Dunbar School in particular and things like that. So I imagine that by the time you arrived, it sounds like probably things were a little bit more integrated by then, but I'm not sure.
I think the schools were. Dunbar at that point was no longer in existence. I did not attend Dunbar, but segregation was still here in Tucson. I grew up where the African Americans and Hispanics, the Hispanics had their own movie theater where they showed movies, but the African Americans, when it came to the theaters, we had to sit upstairs. You can imagine this is in the 60s. We had to sit upstairs, and I don't think we went to the counters, Walgreens and Woolworths to eat, but and the swim pools were segregated, and that the African Americans students, colored we were called back then. We've been called a number of things, but the colored had one day a week to swim, and then after we would swim, they would drain the pool, fill it up again for the white kids to swim. We had Sunset Rollerama, where we only had Sundays that we could go there. So segregation was very much in the forefront. And being from Texas, we used to go home 2 or 3 times a year, especially around Christmas because of my grandmother's birthday. And they still have the signs, colored people, white people, colored fountains. And so it was, segregation still was very, very much alive. I experienced that more when I went to Texas, I think, than living in Tucson. But you just knew your place, and your parents protected you. And like when we travel between Tucson or Hill Bend and Coleman, Texas, my parents knew where to stop to get gas or to get food. Well, my mother always cooked food, or we'd stop and get lunch meat and crackers and cheese to eat because they knew more about the segregation than we kids did. I think we saw it as a game. They knew it was a reality.
What do you mean by that? Saw it as a game. Tell me about that.
Well, an incident when I was in Coleman, Texas, I think I may have been 10, 12 years old. My parents, after my dad stopped working for the railroad, worked at the local restaurants in Hill Bend. There was 2 or 3. Well, my mother and dad worked at the restaurants. I had the opportunity as, a child of one of the workers, I could go behind the counter, make my own milkshakes. So I get to Coleman, Texas one summer. I go sit at the counter, and the waitress kept passing me by, and I finally said, "Miss, I want just to order a milkshake." She said, "Gal," they never called you girl, you were gal, "you have to go around to the window to order." That was a shock to me. It's like I told her, I can make my own. She says, "No, you have to go around to the window." So that was, I didn't understand as a child my place because, like I say, Hill Bend, my place was behind the counter making my own milkshake and sitting down and drinking it. So our parents protected us, shielded us from the reality of them calling you gal, my dad being a grown man being called boy.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that's always been interesting to me, just when I went to school, I was a sociology major, so we took a lot of classes on race and ethnicity and things of that nature. And I always remember our professors asking us the question of, when was the first time that you realized what race was, or that you realized that you, in particular, if you're a person of color, like that you were different, so to speak. And I think all of us have these different experiences in terms of kind of realizing what that meant. And I wonder for you if you've ever taken a moment to kind of reflect on that, or if you know kind of when that stood out for you. I know it's a big question.
It probably, you know what, I think what really stood out is when I went to the University of Arizona, and Shockley and Jensen was the profound authors of, racism. And when they first said in the book, part of their book, I just remember a part where they talked about how Black families were so separated and disengaged. And I was young then, so I didn't speak up. And I want to tell them, we were not. When in our families, if an aunt, uncle, cousin, whatever couldn't take care of a child, they came to the family. So they became your cousin, but your cousin living with you. And I just didn't understand that they didn't understand how close family was to African Americans. We took care of each other. The government didn't pay you to do that. You just did that. I'm an only daughter, but I always had other female cousins that were there. My cousin Vera Lee, my cousin Velma. So we always had people, and my grandmother always had her grandkids, some grandchild there. So I didn't understand. So I think that was puzzling to me that they didn't know, because I think a lot of times with researchers, they research a certain segment, and research is what the researcher wants to believe. And that was a falsehood to me.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think a lot of times too, it's our education system, at least in my opinion, sometimes moves forward these narratives, right? That certain things are the way that we want to see them. But no, I would absolutely agree with you. At least for myself, I feel like everything that I've learned at trying to educate myself anyway, as well as places that I've lived. I've actually lived in a lot of communities that were predominantly Black communities. And I think any researcher if they took any actual time, in the community would never say something like that. No. But again, I think that's what's so important about proper education too, to really understand where these concepts come from, these misconceptions. So thank you for sharing that. I also wonder, how did you, because before you became president of the NAACP, I understand that that's something that you've kind of done now in retirement. What were you doing before that when you were working? I just wonder a little bit about your background.
Okay, what was I doing? Nothing. Doing whatever I wanted to do with every day of my life.
Enjoying retirement.
Enjoying retirement. I worked for Pima Community College for 33 years. I started college, Pima, when it first opened the West Campus in '71. And I was in the second graduating class of Pima College, and had the privilege of coming back and working for a program Paso Adelante, which means a step forward, in '74. And then went from there, '74, I think it was, who was my child? I have to look at my life by children. When my third child was born in '77, I moved into being a counselor. And then I think in 1980, I moved into Director of Minority Affairs. And from there, I became an administrator. And my last years at Pima was counseling, going back to really what I love. Administration, it was okay, but I enjoy one-on-one contact with students, because when I was a student at Pima, I used to say, Lord, what is my role? I don't know what I'm going to be. And so it led me into rehabilitation and working with students, my greatest love. And I say that to say that I didn't plan on being the president of the Tucson branch NAACP, but my life patterns that I did led me to that. Like I tell people, and I had Judge Collins laugh at me. I was the third African American member of the Tucson Junior League. Now, my mother used to clean the houses for the Junior League. Here I am, a member of the Junior League. But in the Junior League, I learned things like how to conduct a meeting because they were concise. They had 3 minutes for this or 2 minutes for that. But I learned, and I also learned that they were a social service, not just white ladies that went to teas. Even though I did take my 4 daughters at a time. One time I had my 2 sisters, so we did go to a tea with them. But it was quite a learning experience, and I will tell any young minority, get involved in other communities other than just Blacks. I've had the opportunity to work with the Native Americans, even took my girls for a weekend stay on the reservation, which taught them about other cultures. It's just important to broaden your world and recognize when you do this that there's more similarities across the races than differences.
Absolutely.
And my oldest and friend here in Tucson is Grace, who's Hispanic. Gracie and I have been friends since I was 14. Love Gracie to death. Don't see her often, but that's my oldest friend, is a Hispanic female. So I've been blessed to have the diversity, because I think one thing that we learn as minorities, how to operate in the white man's world. They don't know how to operate in ours, but we're sophisticated enough to know how to operate within their world. I know how to operate when I'm there, but then when I get with my sisters and brothers, totally different me. You would say that's not the same person that works at Pima College, but you learn to play the game of survival.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a term that sometimes people use for that called code switching.
Okay.
Which,
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Which is absolutely what you're describing.
Or you know what I enjoy is that when you're in a room with other African Americans, we have our own code. We don't have to talk. We can just nod at each other. And like raising your kids, Black people just get that child the eye, like, you better stop doing that. And they know instantly to stop doing it, except when you get kids like my youngest daughter, Jamae, that would give you the eye back. But there's just codes that we know, like you say, how are you doing? We don't need you to go into a dissertation. The response back, fine, and you. So there's codes that you formulate within your own groups.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally understand what you're talking about. And I think, what's interesting is that for this particular forum, right, for the Odyssey audience, we have people that come from lots of different backgrounds in the Odyssey audience who are going to be, watching this as part of the show or the introduction to the show. And I think it's interesting because, what I love about Odyssey, or the reason I got involved with it, was because I think there's something really powerful about just hearing each other's perspectives, learning from each other that way. And that is really what we're all about, which is just listening to each other's stories and the fact that really helps create community. So for everything that you're sharing, I think it's interesting, and hopefully will be, if it's something new to people, I hope that they certainly will take that into consideration to learn from that, because I think one of the most important things in terms of us helping each other, right, which I think right now with everything going on, I think it's our responsibility to help the Black community in whatever way that we can as quote unquote allies. And I think that really starts with empathy. So empathy to me is developed by us listening and understanding each other. So for that reason, I just really want to thank you for just opening up and talking about even just your personal experience too, in addition to, your professional background as well. And let's talk for a minute about the NAACP. What I know that you all, one of the things that I noticed kind of in interacting was there you all have a lot going on and everybody's always busy. So I wonder, can you tell us a little bit about what the NAACP does here in Tucson?
Well, right now with George Floyd's death, it has triggered a lot of things that we're used to. I had the opportunity last year to make the trip to Ghana, Africa. And it's sad to say it's 400 years, but we still have racism. It's alive. Like I said, in the 60s, it was obvious because there were signs that told you. Then they went to the subtleness of letting you know what your place is. So we've deal with cases with job discrimination, school issues of kids being in a predominantly white school and teachers not knowing how to deal, especially African-American boys. The Juvenile Court Center, you go to school, the SROs are called before they call a parent. Back when I was a kid, the parent was called first. Now they call the police. Why? So we deal with issues like that, mainly with Tucson Unified School District, but other districts as well. We did the webinar with TPD, which was an excellent, well-attended webinar. And we're doing a second one with the youth, because our youth are our future. And we're finding that our youth are disproportionately going to juvenile, or the adult are disproportionately going to prison. So the prison system is our new Jim Crow. I mean, an African-American male or female gets stopped with a couple ounces of marijuana, they get sentenced 5 to 10 years. White collar crimes, oh no, we'll give you probation. And now cannabis is legal. Marijuana is legal. But how many of our African-American men and women are still within the prison system for a non-violent offense, or end up in jail because they cannot pay their fines, fine violations? So that's a major, major issue. Education and unemployment, they'll factor in numbers. Oh, employment is up, but is it up in the Black community? We're service-oriented, the majority of our African Americans. So the majority of them can't stay home or do their jobs from home. So they gotta go out. Then COVID-19 is real, even though our administration number 45 wanna say it's a hoax. It's not. I had a sister-in-law that passed. A friend of mine here in Tucson passed. So it's evident. Now we have to do the Zoom meetings. I'm used to touch, feel, hug. Now I got to say, bump the elbow. So it's a whole new way that we have to get used to evolving and developing. But I will say that we've had the Jewish community, Rotary clubs reach out to us. They want to get to know us. And I want to tell them the best way to get to know us, come to our Black churches, if you go to church, and not everybody is church, I know that, or come to our homes. If I invite you in, you get a true feeling of what an African American is like. You know, that being Hispanic. You get invited to the quinceañeras, and that you get to know people. I have a good friend, Barbara Ogunta, who's Native American. She invited me to her home blessing. I'd never been. I mean, that was an experience that I will remember the rest of my life. So this whole issue of race and the fighting and the peaceful march, I was just looking at TV and they showed where these peaceful marches was infiltrated by white supremacists. But who gets blamed? The young white Black protesters that are out there, Black Lives Matter. And I'm glad to see them out there because, with the passing of John Lewis, I come from his era, we need young people to take up the torch to move forward with this whole, it's just a whole new thing. They have social media so they can quickly get the information out and protest and all of that. And that's wonderful. I'm so glad to see them. And the other thing that we're working really hard on is voting. Voting, your vote makes a difference. And some of our younger people have got disenfranchised with that area. And you have to look at the voter suppression. Number 45, trying to defund the post office. I mean, that's crazy. I vote by mail. He votes by mail. Is his vote not valid? Did somebody else do it for him? That would be the question I would ask him. Can you read? Mm-hmm. So that's a big issue. The census is another big issue. We must take the time. It takes less than 5 minutes to fill out your census and get that in, because that's money to our neighborhoods that's so desperately needed. Another thing is the whole issue of children having laptops or to do their homework, because the reality is, I'm glad I don't have a child, but I do have grandchildren that will be going to school. What about paying for the internet? So there's so many issues going on today in our world that it's hard to talk about. But if you want to get involved with us, the Tucson branch NAACP is $30 a year to become a member. We meet the second Monday. It was at the Donald Lincoln Center, but now with COVID, we're meeting by Zoom. We have a web page and we have Facebook that will give you that information. Please join us. I need people that are willing to work. And this is all volunteer. I don't get a dime for what I do, but I do it because I want to make a difference. Like John Lewis said, I like getting into good trouble. I like speaking out. I like making you feel uncomfortable.
Thank you for saying that. That's so important. And I think you actually read my mind in terms of my next question to you, which is just how can we get involved and assist? Because I think what I've heard a lot from people, right, especially people who are kind of waking up for the first time to understand what racism is and that it is still an issue. I think people maybe have assumed that it got left in the past or something, but just as the world has evolved, racism has evolved in many ways with it, right? It looks different now. Yeah, it just looks different, but it's still there and it's still pervasive. So we need to continue fighting against it. And the fact that you mentioned just how, number one, how you all meet, I think is really important. We're going to do our best to get the word out about this show so that we can hopefully collect some funding for you all, and we'll forward that funding to the NAACP. But like you said, it sounds like the other resource that's needed is just people power, right? Some volunteer help. Yeah,
money is needed, but we need workers. We need people that are really committed with Tucson's NAACP been in existence over 100 years. The National is getting ready to have their 111th convention in September. You can tune in, learn more. Go on the national website, and there are so many podcasts, webinars that will educate you on what we need. The fight is still there. It hasn't stopped. It's not just African American, it's Native Americans, it's Hispanic, it's Oriental, it's everybody. The gay community, but what I can never get that acronym right. It's LGBTQ. It's a long acronym. LGBTQ. It's a really all of us, because we don't understand in their community how many African American, gay or transgender people are murdered.
Yes.
I mean, we talk about the Blacks, but it's unbelievable how their rights are so violated. And I'm so glad that the Supreme Court recognized, the need for health insurance and recognizing that they have a right to get married. It may not be your belief or my belief, but they're still human
Yes.
and they
And
have
that's,
their rights.
and that's the thing is, I remember seeing a post recently, with social media just kind of playing such a big role right now, right? And everything that we're doing every day. And I remember seeing this post that said, if you've never had to fight for your human rights in the Supreme Court, then you have privilege. And that is really, I think, what it comes down to is so many of these things are, they continue to be, again, supported by laws and policies. And so I really appreciate you, especially going into the need for participating, right? Actively voting and participating in the census. All of these things are incredibly important. And I'm really glad you brought that up.
And voting is just so important because they're trying their best to do voter suppression. It's unreal. And number 45 is like writing the narrative now. So if he loses, what'll happen? And the Constitution, I'm so glad that our forefathers had the wisdom to write the Constitution like they did. If there's no election, then we have Nancy Pelosi that will step in. So I mean, there'll be an election. He doesn't have the right to stop that. And my biggest concern is the non-national guidance on our pandemic. I mean, we need national, and I don't understand, and I don't say anything to people why they won't wear masks. You go to Circle K, they'll say no shoes, no shirt, no service. And then people are getting killed because she's saying you can't come in without a mask. That's human life, human rights that are being violated.
Yes, and you're absolutely correct too that it's disproportionately hurting people of color, in particular Black people and Latino people. We're the ones that are dying the most, and so I think that this is. I hope that people who are watching this will really kind of take a minute to also educate themselves a little bit more around those issues. And again, for anybody who has questioned the wearing of the mask, I think hopefully this will be helpful too, because it's really about, again, developing empathy for other people and caring and being considerate of other people's lives.
All lives matters, but Black lives really do matter because we've been oppressed. A Native American friend of mine says, you guys survived in the belly of a whale. I don't know how you did it. And we also, another thing Marcus Briggs said, is our words travel around the world. So be careful what words you say, and you win more with love than hate. It takes a lot of energy to hate.
And that's why,
And I was going to say, I was really taken by when John Lewis was alive, that the man that beat him came to him to ask for forgiveness, and he forgave him. And that's what we need to learn to do, is the art of forgiving. You don't forget, but if you carry hate in your heart, hate destroys you, not the other person.
You're absolutely right. I think the other thing too is in the way in which we battle this. Like, I'm glad that you brought up, just the peaceful protest and doing this in ways that make sense. I wonder if you have any advice for people who are going to watch this, right, on how we can get involved, in particular, specifically here in Tucson. Like you mentioned, attending the NAACP, obviously the meetings that are happening on Zoom, giving to the NAACP, and obviously also volunteering. But in general, for people who are wondering what they can do, especially if they perhaps can't go out and peacefully protest due to the COVID-19 pandemic, what other things would you recommend to people who want to kind of just get involved in some kind of a way?
There's groups that, you could do things like donating water to the homeless, because we do have a large homeless population. Friendship Missionary Baptist Church feeds the homeless twice a month, the second and fourth Saturday. So there's avenues to donate, donate to, if not the NAACP, donate to a charity that you like. Maybe even look at purchasing a laptop for a young person. So there are many ways to be involved. The IMA will be doing that's the Interdenominational Ministers Alliance Community and Action Team, will be doing their Zoom meetings. Take part in those. They have, I'm sure, a web page. So there are just so many avenues. Writing letters to our state legislatures on bills, to our school districts on how you feel about the opening of schools, because our voices, the more we talk, the more we can bring about change.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Doris. This has been really wonderful talking to you today, hearing your personal story, but also getting some really good, just very clear advice on being involved in the process and doing what we can to support in any way that is possible. So I'll go ahead and pause our conversation here, and we're going to add this obviously to the rest of the show, hearing other people's personal stories. But I can't thank you enough for your time, for speaking to me on the phone and on Zoom, and just being involved with Odyssey. I hope that someday when we're able to have shows in person again, we can invite you and you can come by and take a look at kind of the magic of Odyssey as it normally is in person.
Well,
Okay.
Thank God that you're keeping up your work, because all of us have to learn a new way, especially us elders have to learn. That's, I think, is my biggest challenge, is working with the different generations. But we're working together. They're allowing us to go at our slow pace while they're speeding on. And as I tell my members, to be a leader, you have to learn to follow. There's wisdom in us elders, and there's also wisdom in the younger people. We can learn from each other to make this world, a better place. We're all needed. We're all needed. So thank
Yes.
you, Ana, for interviewing me, and it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you again.
We have many stories to tell, but at this time, I will concentrate on the ministry of reconciliation in the church. Actually, we came to Tucson in 1969. My husband was sent to Davis Monthan Air Force Base, and we were, I guess, a couple of years from retirement. Anyway, his assignment has taken us to many, many places. And sometimes those places were very uncomfortable because we were African Americans, and of course, we ran into a lot of racism, racial issues. And we'll talk about those later. Whenever my husband took us, we found some things that were uncomfortable. And one of the major concerns that we had in Tucson was in the church in America, the divide in the church in America. In 1980, Sunshine Ministries were born. Our pastor, our son, the late Bishop William O. Wills Jr., became the pastor. And we saw so much division in the churches. And that was a major concern. So he decided to address the issue. In 1987, he saw a vision to host a racial reconciliation conference. And the theme of that conference was racial reconciliation in the body of Christ, in the church, really. Following the first conference, many monthly workshops were started. We had many workshops to bring people together in the community to talk about issues, etc. And since that time, we have become a network. It's called Racial Reconciliation Community Outreach Network. And we're involved with local organizations, businesses, government agencies, churches, neighborhood associations, school administrators, and other organizations whose overall goal is to improve our lives. At this time, the world is in a state of topsy-turvy, I would say. It's really, the whole world, really. And we didn't realize this would happen during that time, but I thank God that we see it now. I believe the church is the catalyst for change that is so desperately needed now. And we are prayerfully seeking the change that indicates the reconciliation mentioned in St. John, the 17th chapter. And it represents our oneness in Christ Jesus. We host a 3-day conference every June. We look at some of these issues. We bring in great people from across the nation. We've done this for the past 33 years, because this year, in the month of June, because of the pandemic and coronavirus, we had to cancel the conference. But we've had this thing for at least 33 years. And the name of the conference is The Awakening. The Awakening. We realize the church seems to be kind of sleeping, so we need to wake up and hear what's happening around. Now, reconciliation is a service. It's really a ministry, but a service. We have to serve each other and learn about what we need to do, how to come together, break down these barriers. And that's been in my heart. That's a heartfelt for me. But it's so much to say, and I don't want to take up too much time because I have these other people here who have a lot of input to put in. But in the meantime, that's where we are right now. That's where we are. And later on, we'll tell you where we're going. We told you where we started, where we are right now. We're continuing. In spite of all the things that's happened, we're still here to bring about restitution and reconciliation among the races. That's what we're about. Okay, so I'm going to be quiet and let Mr. Wills and Mrs. Thompson have what they say.
Hello, my name is Bill Wills. I was listening to what Mrs. Wilson said previously. And when you talk about how this ministry got started, we have to look at it from the standpoint, really we started right here in this very room that we're sitting in at this time. And then we moved from this room when we got too big, where we had people overflowing back into the kitchen and into the living room. We moved into a hotel where we had a lot more space. And then from the hotel, we moved into a retail. And finally, from the retail to our present property, which we own, clear, owe no money on it, which is, thank God for that, at 2145 South Saguaro Avenue. So we've been through the whole rimaram of coming from the house to a rental place, to a hotel, to a retail, and then finally to our own property. So I thank God for all of the things that He's done to enable us to do that. In addition to that, we talk about reconciliation. One of the main things that we used to have when Pastor was here was each year towards the Halloween season, we would have an outreach on the property. And we've seen as much as 2,000 to 3,000 people on that property at that outreach. So it's something we've stopped right now because of I was ill for a period of time. But I'm looking at that. We're looking again at doing that because it's a way of sharing with people. Beverly, your turn.
Are you ready? Yes. I'm Beverly Thompson, married, wife of Ron Thompson, one daughter, military wife. We retired after 24 years. I was an administrator for Christian education, and throughout my travels, I have come into quite a lot of diversity problems. The Wills, who I call my cousin and mom and pop, they didn't bring up to you, but the Wills dealt with many racial problems throughout their journey. Crosses burnt in their yard on the basis, on one of the bases that they were at. Also, the brutality that Pop had to deal with throughout his lifetime, living in New York City. And that was really a very pivotal part that I think his son, whenever his son heard these situations that the parents went through and actually saw the situation with the cross, I think that is what really got his heart and his mind to thinking there's something that needs to be done. And that's what really was one of the pivotal parts that I see that started them on this trail. Throughout the years, they have fought to try and bring churches together in our community. And that is what we strive for right now, because for such a time as this, we need racial reconciliation more than ever. This is something that God ordained whenever he made us as creatures. And each of us as human creatures are coming together as one. That was his main goal, which we would attain. We will never see it on this side, but we will see it on the other side when we get to heaven. That was his whole plan. Because the scene that is described in Revelations 5 and 7 says that where every nation and tribe and tongue gather before the throne of God, this is not just some embellishing detail in John's vision. This is an intentional display of unifying the power of the gospel to bring together in a new humanity that sin destroyed in the fall. This tells us that racial reconciliation is not just a nice thing or just to have something in the community or an ideal in the churches, but it's something that's very close to the heart of God. The vision of the kingdom in the Revelation tells us this is what our God desires. And this is what the Wills have fought for so many years and pushed for the community. It has not been an easy fight. We've opened up the doors, many opportunities to bring people together. But for such a time as this, we're going to be working on workshops in the community. We will be using more of the technology now that we have to bring forth something that Maya Angelou is a word that is a part of her poem I always wanted to remember. And it says, in diversity, there is beauty and there is strength. So when we bring the community together, the churches together, we bring the beauty and we bring the strength. And for such a time as this is something that is very much needed. The churches have tended to take a blind eye away from what we're really striving for as one. Our youth is something that is a very vital of importance to us right now. This year, we were going to be presenting the family, reconciling the family. And more than ever, with the pandemic going on, the families are in the homes together. And I pray there's a way that the Wills and Archon can tap into these families in some way to see so much of the division that is taking place. We cannot come together until we work together. And there's such a division in the communities. We have a large Latino community here. We have an African American community. We have Korean community. We have from Africa now, we have quite a lot of interracial people here in our district here in Tucson. And we don't want to keep it in an incubator. We want to let it out with our reconciliation. And so we don't want to imagine and become a place where we can truly envision, Archon can truly envision and burst through the doors and break down the walls that are keeping us from coming together as one. I believe that one of the bridges that we wanted to break down was our churches is a main one. Going and making the churches aware that this is a true necessity to bring forth a conversation in this time, because there are young people that have turned away from the churches because they're seeing something different out on the streets now as they begin to march right now. They're seeing that there's some disconnect, and with the brutal killings lately, the disconnect has brought Archon to this time where we now need to stand up. And this is something that the Wills and our Archon community, our committee has worked hard to try and be a part of with the churches. But now more than ever, we are standing together to work and break down these walls that divide us. And in order to make us stronger, we have to work as one. And we will continue to share the gospel of Jesus Christ and cultivate a thriving and a diverse community throughout Tucson, because we will model for the rest of the community as we have so done in our past through harvest festivals, bringing men and women and children together of all diversities, bringing the police in and the children seeing laughter and just getting to know them, bringing the fire department in, bringing the community together, the laughter, the joy, but bringing the commonality that we all have together is such a vital thing we need right now in our community. And I'll turn it back over to the Wills.
Actually, in the beginning, when I introduced myself, I forgot to mention my three wonderful children and my great-grandchildren, and they're all involved. Beverly was talking about the youth. That's my heart, to see them develop, mentally, physically, spiritually. We need that. In fact, I found out that wisdom and knowledge is the stability of our time. And by me being 91 years old, I must say that right now, I need the help of these young people, and they need me. They need the wisdom that I have. And so that's my prayer, is really to help them. And I'm seeing a lot. These children are so well educated. They're so smart, I want to use that word, because they're born that way. It's in them. I see them coming here and, in fact, watching my youngest great-grandchild, 8 months old, she is something. But I'm looking at the whole overall thing. And when I look at what racism really is, that's what our leader told us. His definition was a system of values inflicted by a dominant group, hindering the subdominant group's ability to prosper, advance, and grow. It hinders us. So that's what's happening that's what racism really is, the system of that. And so And we know there's prejudice here, and there's racism, and all those kind of things. It keeps us apart. And my daily prayer and aim is to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. I have to be it. And when I be it, they can see it. So that's one of the things I keep in mind.
Very good.